哇！放司机了！哇！哇！
A pastor live-streamed prayers throughout the hurricane using backup battery packs. Hundreds tuned in from darkened homes and flooded shelters. It kept us connected, one viewer wrote. I couldn't see the sky, but I could hear faith. The stream ran 14 hours without pause. A 30-foot metal billboard was torn from its supports and hurled through the second-story window of a downtown apartment complex. Miraculously, no one was in the room when it hit. The wind-carried structure demolished furniture, shattered glass, and embedded part of itself into the opposite wall. It sounded like a bomb went off, said a neighbor. Fire officials said if the impact had happened an hour earlier, during a birthday party in the same unit, there would have been fatalities. The billboard's remains were later found 4 blocks away. First responders were stunned to find an SUV lodged halfway into the second-floor balcony of an apartment complex. According to witnesses, the parked vehicle was lifted by extreme winds during the hurricane's peak and hurled across a 40-foot embankment. No one was inside the SUV, and the residents of the affected apartment were unharmed. I thought it was a bomb going off, said one tenant. Engineers say wind acceleration between nearby buildings likely created a tunnel effect. It wasn't just strong wind. It was focused, violent wind, said a structural analyst on scene. The 140-year-old bell tower of St. Jude's Church collapsed overnight as hurricane winds exceeding 100 miles per hour battered the region. Witnesses described a thunderous cracking sound before the structure crumbled, scattering bricks across the square. No one was injured as the area had been evacuated, but the loss of the historic landmark hit locals hard. It was the soul of this town, one resident said through tears. Authorities say the winds were too strong for the aging structure to withstand. Volunteers are already planning to preserve parts of the wreckage for future restoration. A man's entire roof was torn off in a single gust. But what stunned neighbors most was that it landed upright, perfectly intact, 2 houses down. It was like a hat blown off someone's head, one witness said. No one was hurt, though the home is now considered structurally unsafe. Insurance adjusters called it an extremely rare wind pattern event. The homeowner joked, "If anyone needs a roof, I've got a spare." Three fishermen who stayed aboard their boat during the storm are missing. The vessel's GPS last pinged 2 miles offshore before signals were lost. Debris believed to be from the boat washed ashore Sunday. Search efforts continue by air and sea, though officials say conditions are challenging. The families are urging anyone with information to contact authorities.
Oh wei, hier ist gerade ein Tornado in Mannheim und gerade ist unser Hallendach weggeflogen. Ja, schauen wir mal, ob wir morgen im Trockenen arbeiten.
An estimated 12 million tons of debris now cover the affected coastal region. Everything from drywall to rooftops to boats thrown inland lies in chaotic piles across roads and lawns. Landfills are overwhelmed. Officials plan to open temporary dump sites and have called in National Guard units to assist with logistics. Cleanup costs could exceed $500 million. The storm was an hour long. The cleanup may take a year, said a federal disaster response coordinator. Inmates from the county jail were evacuated by armored bus, hands zip-tied, escorted by National Guard. A low-lying floodplain threatened the facility, and officials moved over 140 prisoners to a high-security unit inland. It was a quiet, tense transfer. "We've never evacuated our jail before," said the sheriff. Power was lost 2 hours later, and parts of the jail were knee-deep in water by morning. In one neighborhood, a woman returned to find her brother's car still in the driveway, keys inside but no sign of him. His phone last pinged from the cell tower nearby minutes before landfall. Teams searched surrounding woods and ditches. As of Friday, he remains missing. It is one of 127 open missing person cases linked to the storm.
caiu todas as árvores. Filha do céu. Tornado mesmo.
An old man stood in the ruins of his workshop, running his hands over rusted tools he'd once polished every week. The wind had knocked down one wall, but left the other three standing, like a set on a stage. He didn't speak much as neighbors offered help. Instead, he swept sawdust from the floor, straightened a stool, and set a bent hammer carefully on the bench. "It's not gone," he finally said, "just quieter now." Over 4,000 utility poles were downed across the affected zone, leaving more than 300,000 residents without power. Some communities may remain dark for weeks. Substations flooded, transmission lines snapped, and transformer fires were reported in multiple locations. Repair crews from 6 neighboring states have been dispatched, working 16-hour shifts. "We've never had this many lines down at once," said a utility spokesperson. Hospitals and shelters are running on backup generators, with fuel being airlifted into remote areas. A rescue team responding to a 911 call found an elderly man trapped in his attic by rising water. He had broken through the ceiling with a crowbar and waited for 18 hours with a flashlight and a transistor radio. "They heard the tapping from the boat," he said. "He was dehydrated but otherwise fine. They were angels," he said of the crew. Preliminary assessments show that nearly 70% of homes and buildings in the coastal counties sustained wind-related damage during the recent hurricane. Over 40 mobile homes were completely overturned, and at least 12 commercial structures lost significant portions of their roofs. Utility poles were snapped along 19 major roads, and wind gusts were measured up to 129 miles per hour in some areas. Officials noted that older buildings were disproportionately affected. Insurance teams have begun documenting losses, with early estimates in the hundreds of millions. Emergency shelters remain at capacity as debris removal continues. A firefighter swam across a flooded intersection carrying a life vest in his teeth. Inside the stranded SUV was a woman 9 months pregnant. Contractions already started. With help from neighbors, she was floated on an air mattress to dry ground, then rushed to a hospital. Her baby was born 2 hours later, healthy and strong. "He came into the world like a rescue mission," the father said. The morning after, children wandered the neighborhood, pointing out what had changed. "That tree wasn't broken before," one said. "That trampoline wasn't there." They turned it into a game, spot the difference, but the parents watched in silence, tallying lost cars, collapsed roofs, shredded fences. One boy found a soggy storybook in a ditch and began reading aloud, sitting cross-legged on the wet sidewalk. Others joined him. For a moment, no one remembered the night's terror, only the sound of a child's voice trying to bring a story back to life. The agricultural sector suffered heavy losses, with initial reports indicating over 60% of local crops destroyed. Grain silos crumpled like cans, and irrigation systems were twisted beyond recognition. Dozens of livestock barns collapsed, and fencing across thousands of acres was torn away. Farmers say it could take years to recover. One dairy cooperative reported 180 animals missing or dead. The State Agricultural Board is coordinating emergency aid and veterinary support in the hardest-hit rural zones. A group of 5 hikers who had set out before the storm were reported overdue when families lost contact. Their last known location was near a backcountry trail in the national forest. Heavy winds toppled trees and blocked access roads. Rescue teams located their abandoned campsite but found no sign of the hikers. A coordinated search is underway with drones, dogs, and volunteers. A canine search team located 2 missing teens in a collapsed shed behind their home. They had taken shelter there after the main house roof failed. The dog alerted to movement under debris. Rescuers dug them out with hand tools. Both were cold and bruised, but safe. "We thought no one knew we were here," said one of the teens through tears. After the hurricane and widespread flooding along the southern coast, rescue teams found 17-year-old Lucas Reyes floating alone through a submerged neighborhood, clinging to the door of a refrigerator. His family's trailer had been swept away overnight. Using jumper cables, Reyes tied himself to the door and drifted for 16 hours through dark, debris-filled waters. "I just kept thinking I had to stay awake," he told medics. Cold, dehydrated, and covered in cuts, he was taken to a local hospital and is expected to recover fully. Emergency officials called his survival remarkable and credited his quick thinking under pressure. After the storm, a cross made of driftwood was discovered lodged upright in a sand dune where dozens had sought shelter. Locals have since preserved it as a symbol. "It felt like he marked the place where we were saved," said one evacuee. "We'll never move it." When the winds began tearing shingles from roofs, 68-year-old Lester Jennings ran outside to retrieve his garbage bins. A sudden gust knocked him off his feet and sent him sliding across his lawn. He grabbed onto the metal base of his mailbox and held on as the wind roared over him. "I thought I'd be blown into the next county," he said. When the storm passed, he was soaked, bruised, but alive. His mailbox was bent and his house badly damaged, but Jennings credits that metal post for saving his life. "Strongest thing I ever installed," he joked. The downtown business district was left in ruins after sustained winds sheared off signage, shattered storefronts, and caused partial collapses in 4 commercial buildings. The city estimates more than $70 million in damage to infrastructure alone. Crews are still working to clear glass and metal from the main thoroughfares. Of the 123 businesses surveyed post-storm, only 27 were able to reopen. Local officials have requested federal disaster relief as cleanup efforts intensify. In the early hours after the hurricane made landfall, 62-year-old Marvin Ellis carried his paralyzed neighbor 2 miles through waist-high floodwaters to reach a rescue point. With no cell service and streets submerged, Ellis wrapped the man in plastic sheeting, tied him to his back with extension cords, and waded through swirling debris. "I couldn't leave him. He's family," Ellis said. Both were treated for exhaustion and exposure. Paramedics say their survival came down to Ellis's strength, calm thinking, and deep sense of duty. "He saved my life," the neighbor whispered from his hospital bed. A caravan of RVs and pickup trucks crawled along the interstate, packed with families, pets, and everything they could strap down. Some pulled boats, others had tarps over furniture. Gas ran out in 2 towns, and the National Guard airlifted fuel to stranded drivers. It was the largest civilian evacuation the county had seen since the 1990s, with more than 150,000 people leaving in under 48 hours.
I'm getting hailed on.
As students and staff were being evacuated from the local high school, a massive gust tore off the gymnasium roof, sending metal panels flying across the parking lot. Surveillance footage shows teachers herding children out just moments before collapse. "We had 20 seconds, maybe less," said Principal Harris. No one was injured, though several cars were crushed by falling debris. Officials say the storm's wind speeds exceeded 120 miles per hour. The gym, built in the 1960s, was not rated for such conditions. Classes remained suspended. "We were lucky," Harris added. "That wind came for blood." No one expected the tree to survive. It had stood in the town square for over a century, and as the storm hit, people watched it bend almost to the ground. The next morning, every building around it was damaged. Windows shattered, signs ripped off, but the tree still stood, stripped of leaves but upright. Someone tied a ribbon to its trunk. 2 days later, others added flowers, candles, handwritten notes. It became a quiet monument to the idea that some things, even in chaos, can hold fast. Moments before a violent gust lifted their camper off the ground, 9-year-old Tyler was yanked out by his older sister, who heard the structure creaking. "I don't know why, but I just grabbed him and ran," she said. Seconds later, the wind tossed the camper 50 feet across a field, smashing it into trees. The family had ignored evacuation orders, thinking the storm wouldn't hit hard. Officials say the siblings narrowly avoided tragedy. "If she had waited even 5 seconds more," a firefighter said, "we'd be telling a different story."